Andrés, gracias por invitarme. Estoy muy contento de estar aquí. Este evento es magnífico. And thank you to my volunteer for helping me say that, René Simwes. So Facebook. I wrote a book about Facebook up there. And in the fall of 2007, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg had a visitor in Palo Alto. CEO of Microsoft, Steve Ballmer, came down and said, I want to buy Facebook for $15 billion. And Mark Zuckerberg, who was 23 years old, and who would have taken home personally $4 billion if he had done that deal, didn't even consider accepting it. That is a very unusual thing, and it's stories like that that make telling the story of Facebook very unusual and very exciting for me. So many of you probably think of Facebook, especially the older ones among you, as something that kids use to send silly messages. And it is that, but I'm here to tell you it's also much more than that. It's the largest site on the internet. It's the fastest growing company in history. It is a major force in modern society, and it represents an entirely new form of communication. So, I wanted to just briefly respond to the 4 speakers that kicked off the event this morning in the context of Facebook. And to Sir Ken Robinson, I'd like to say that Facebook is a platform for passionate creativity. To Sheena Iyengar, I would say that Facebook increases choice in a very American way. And to Hans Rosling, I would say that Facebook is a central tool of and indicator of converging global development. Then to Malcolm Gladwell, I would say that it's reasonable to ask if Mark Zuckerberg is overconfident as an expert and a leader. And I will say that it's hard to imagine someone more confident than him, which is why he's been able to accomplish as much as he has. So, Facebook today has about 600 million active users. They are in every country on the planet, except for a few countries where it's illegal, like Syria, Iran, North Korea, and even in most of those countries, and China, people use it through a proxy server. So there's hundreds of thousands of people in Iran, for example, that use Facebook, many hundreds of thousands. In Mexico, I just looked up just before coming on stage, there are 17 million active users of Facebook in Mexico alone. 17 million. I was sitting in the audience this morning, and at one point, all 4 people in front of me and my volunteer were simultaneously on Facebook. One was on a BlackBerry, 2 were on iPhones, and 1 was on an iPad. Facebook, 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 right in front of me down here this morning. One of the interesting things, when you look at how global Facebook is becoming, it's surprising facts emerge. Like just in the last week or so, it turned out that Indonesia has just become the 2nd largest country on Facebook. It passed beyond the UK, which was number 2 forever. So the US is number 1, Indonesia is number 2, the UK is number 3, and Turkey is number 4. And Mexico's coming up there. 17 million makes it probably one of the 10 largest countries on Facebook. I wanted to tell you a quick story about Indonesia, which gives you a sense of the degree to which Facebook is penetrating beyond being just something that kids use, to send silly messages. About 1.5 years ago, the Muslim imams of Indonesia became concerned about Facebook because it was becoming so popular, and they felt that it was leading potentially to immoral behavior. They weren't sure. So they actually had a special meeting of 400 imams of Indonesia, and they met for over a day to debate and discuss Facebook and what it meant. And at the end, a spokesperson came out, and he said, sort of like when they're electing the Pope, he says, the imams have decided that Facebook has risks, but on balance, it's a very good thing because it allows people to get to know their potential spouse before they get married and other good things. So the imams of Indonesia blessed Facebook. But the story of Facebook is really centered on Mark Zuckerberg. He is the key to the story, and my book is largely a biography of him, and he is an extraordinary person. I sometimes argue he's making more change in the modern world, certainly than anyone who was 26 has ever done in human history, and possibly more than anyone else is doing at this moment in human history. He combines Bill Gates' strategic savvy with Steve Jobs' product obsessiveness. He's not really on their level in terms of what he's accomplished yet, because he's still only 26, but he is very much their peer in terms of the scope of his vision, his determination, and what he has that they lack, which may actually be benefiting him, is a bit of naivete, which just allows him to do what he wants to do and keep succeeding at it. He started Facebook when he was a sophomore at Harvard in 2004. He was 19 years old. And for those of you who've seen the movie, I would just tell you that it's about 40% true. It's not really the true story of Facebook's beginnings. It has some truth in it. It has a lot of ridiculous, made-up stuff in it also. But the thing about Zuckerberg that's especially interesting and that causes the Facebook story to be so interesting is that he retains total and complete control of this company, which is something that is very unusual in any startup. Facebook's 6.5 years old. He controls 3 out of 5 seats on the board of directors, and nothing happens there that he doesn't want. That's bizarre. And what he wants is to change the world and to increase the way that people share information. That's what matters to him much more than getting rich and making money, which is why, unlike any of us could ever imagine, he turned down $4 billion when he was 23 years old. I mean, you can't imagine anybody else doing that. I've never heard of anything like that. But he looks at Facebook at about 600 million active users today, and he's not that impressed. He looks at a world that has 7 billion people, and he says to himself, why shouldn't they all be using Facebook? That's the way he thinks about it. But on the other hand, a lot of the issues around privacy that we've heard so much about, especially in the United States, also stem directly from Mark Zuckerberg. In my book, I have a chapter on privacy, and I have an epigraph that I begin the chapter with, which is a quote from him, in which he says, "You have one identity." Now, what he means by that is that the self that you take to the office, the self you keep at home, the self you have when you go to church, the self at the sex club, whatever they are, should all be the same person. You should be consistent across all those realms in which you live as a person, which is actually a fairly controversial statement, especially for we older people who have done a good job of keeping sort of different images going in different parts of our lives. And if you think about how Facebook is designed and structured, it really does push you toward that kind of consistency across all the realms in which you live. At Facebook, they have a word for that, a phrase they call radical transparency. And at Facebook, they actually believe, some people there, especially some of the early employees who were very close to Mark, that it actually will make us better people to have this radical transparency. And the way it will do that is by causing us to be more honest, in effect. And they talk with pride about how, for example, they say that kids in high school don't cheat on their boyfriends and girlfriends as much as they used to, now that they have to say on Facebook whether or not they're in a relationship. Things like that. But I have to say, I wonder myself, is it going to make us better people, or is it just going to make us more exposed? And I honestly don't think we know the answer to that. But communication is what people do. And that's what being a human is all about. And Facebook represents an entirely new form of communication. I say that it, for the first time ever, automates communication. So we've had email or instant messaging, which are digital, but they're not automated. What Facebook does is it looks at your friends and the interactions you've had with them. It looks at who's visited your page. It looks at whose pages you've visited. It looks at who's looked at photos and who's looked at links to articles or videos. And when you put something on your Facebook page, when you update your status or when you post a video or whatever, the software figures out who is most likely to be interested in that and shows it to them. That is automation. That's algorithmic, and that has never existed before nothing like that has ever existed. That is one of the major reasons that Facebook is so radically different from anything that came before. And it requires the news feed, which, as you may recall, was very controversial when it launched. So I call Facebook a platform for the empowerment of its users. And that's sort of my basic definition of it, which people find controversial since they think of it as, something that you join in order to agree to meet your friend at the mall. But Facebook basically gives all of us our own website, which is connected to the websites of others with incredible efficiency. And it also means that everybody effectively becomes a broadcaster. So, you don't, when I was growing up, we looked to the TV news and there was a broadcaster telling us what was happening. Today, we look to our friends to tell us what's happening. And for many of us, that really is the most important news. So this is the root of what I call the Facebook effect, and that's why I titled my book that. So there's a whole range of areas: politics, media, marketing, business, government, privacy, identity, that are being transformed across the world by Facebook. And I actually disagree a little bit with one of our great morning speakers, Malcolm Gladwell, who recently wrote an article in the New Yorker in which he argued that Facebook and Twitter and social media generally is not likely to be a major tool of social and political activism. The evidence is absolutely that he's wrong. And if you think about it just logically, even though you and I, all of us equivalent to this, join Facebook in order to agree to meet our friends at the mall. I mean, that's the kind of reason we all start on Facebook. Because it's so efficient for doing that sort of thing. But if you have something more important to say to other people, no matter what it is, that you really want a large number of people to find out about, what other system are you going to use to communicate it other than the one that you're already using to agree to meet your friends at the mall, which is so incredibly efficient? And that is why today, whether it's somebody complaining about a pothole in their street or about a stolen election in their country, as happened in Iran, when people are upset about anything, whether it's political or non-political, the first place they typically go is Facebook in every country, because it is so efficient at telling others what you think. Which, by the way, is one reason it's not allowed in China, North Korea, Iran, Syria, etc. So, in Iran, it was a huge force in the Green Revolution when Ahmadinejad stole the election last year. And those protesters were primarily organized, the Green protesters that we read about that took so many risks, were primarily organized with Facebook and Twitter. And in fact, Mousavi, who was the losing candidate in the Iranian election, who had the election basically stolen from him in the opinion of many, he communicated with his followers primarily using Facebook, even though people were using it through proxy servers. Then I tell in my book, which actually I begin my book with the story of the anti-Farc movement in Colombia, and one man, Oscar Morales, who in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. created a group protesting Farc, saying simply, no more lies, no more kidnapping, no more killing, no more Farc. And he invited his 100 Facebook friends to join the group and then went to bed, woke up the next morning, and had 1,000 members of his group. This was in January 2008. And then he went to the beach because it was the holidays, and he came back, and there were 2,500 or something like that members of his group. And he realized he had hit on just the right kind of message that people in Colombia wanted to hear at that moment. They were fed up with Farc, but they had been afraid to express it in the past. And then 1 month to the day after that group was created, and the group eventually grew to 350,000 members, but 1 month to the day after that happened, 10 million people went into the streets of Colombia, all precipitated by that one group, one guy made in the middle of the night in the bedroom of his mother's house. That is a new kind of thing. Facebook also has a huge role in marketing and advertising. It's the most targetable medium in history. We all put up a lot of information about ourselves, and Facebook can use that information to help advertisers show the right information to the right people. And it is becoming a very big deal in advertising and marketing in many, many countries. And Facebook is making a lot of money without even trying that hard to do so. And it's even facilitating commerce for individuals. I met the other day a woman who was Indonesian, and I was talking to her about this incredible success that Facebook is having in Indonesia. And she told me that many users in Indonesia actually use Facebook to kind of create small businesses. They import T-shirts, or they sell something that they make. They post them as Facebook photos, and they sell things over Facebook. So it's actually stimulating the Indonesian economy in an interesting way. I never knew that. Now, you know, Facebook's own view of its future is very counterintuitive. It's not what you would expect. Facebook really wants to become, and Mark wants it to become, part of the infrastructure of the internet. Basically, Facebook wants to take the two things that it basically owns uniquely, which is the identity information about all of us, and what it calls the social graph, which is the set of connections we have between ourselves and other people, and basically not do anything else in the long run, and let other people build applications that take advantage of that. Because in the end, that is such a powerful possession to have those two things. They will be able to build a massive business, and probably if they succeed at that, Mark will be the richest person that ever lived, even richer than Bill Gates, because it will be incredible for advertising, among other things. And, you know, you think that's a weird idea, that Facebook.com might become less important, but if you look at what's actually happening right now, you can see it happening already. For example, many websites have a like button that you click when you go there. So in effect, you're participating in Facebook on a remote website by clicking that like button. And then what's starting to happen now is that other sites are starting to basically take your Facebook news feed and show you that outside of Facebook. So, for example, Skype just recently did a deal with Facebook where you can see your Facebook news feed at Skype. Therefore, at that point, your information is going into Facebook through the like button and elsewhere outside of Facebook, and you're seeing Facebook outside of Facebook. So Facebook.com has nothing to do with that at all. That's the future they think is going to grow. And you see other things happening that show how deeply Facebook is getting integrated into the way other people are building their businesses. Just this week, a company launched a new web browser called Rockmelt, which is intended to compete with Internet Explorer and Firefox and Google Chrome and Safari. And Rockmelt, which is beautifully designed, requires you to log in with your Facebook identity to use it. You cannot use Rockmelt without being on Facebook. And you're not actually on Facebook, you're just using your Facebook login to use the browser. And again, you're getting tons of data from Facebook inside the browser without ever going to Facebook.com. But the fact is, there are enormous risks at this scale and with this scale of ambition for Facebook, and there's no certainty at all that it will succeed forever. Like everything on the internet, you know, we heard earlier today, study history. Everything eventually gets replaced. Facebook perhaps could get replaced even soon. However, you know, You know, I don't think at the moment that Mark Zuckerberg is overconfident. He may be, but the evidence so far suggests that he isn't. I just wanted to give you one final thought. One of the things that's happening in the world today that I'm sure we'll hear about in a variety of ways over the next couple days here at the Ciudad de las Ideas is that the world is becoming urban. The majority of mankind is moving to cities. And in fact, just this last 12 months for the first time was the first time ever when the majority of people lived in cities on the planet. Throughout human history, people have lived in villages and small towns. Now, as we all know, in villages, everybody knows everybody else's business. You know, you can even hear the person in the next hut having sex. There is no privacy in the small town to the degree there is in the city. But isn't it interesting that at the very moment when mankind is moving into cities, the most popular software that has ever existed now recreates that intimacy and transparency of the small town? I find that fascinating. So far, nothing has slowed Facebook down. I think it can grow a lot bigger. Thank you very much.